All right. Welcome, everyone, and welcome back if you have been to one of our webinars before. My name is Keith Spencer, and I am one of our career experts here at FlexJobs. And FlexJobs, for those of you who don't know, has been the most trusted and leading site for remote job listings since 2007. And we are thrilled today to have as our guest Chris Schutt, a life coach at Schutt Career Consulting, to discuss how to cultivate a winning mindset for career change success. Before we dive into our conversation with Chris, I'm going to cover a few housekeeping items. This will be a 45-minute webinar, which will follow a Q&A format so that you can ask Chris your questions. Our session today is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed out to everyone later this week. If you have a question that you would like to ask, please make sure to type that into the Q&A section of Big Marker, not the chat section. This really helps us keep track of questions in one place. And the Q&A section also has a feature where you can click a thumbs up button to upvote any question that you would also like to hear asked. We likely won't be able to answer every question today, but we can almost guarantee that you'll learn something helpful. So with that now out of the way, let's go ahead and turn things over to Chris. Chris, if you wouldn't mind starting off by maybe sharing a little bit about yourself and our topic of changing careers before we dive into our questions.
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me, Keith. I mean, I feel like we've been talking for so long. I'm just absolutely honored to be here. But yeah, my name is Chris Schutt. I'm a life coach, and my career journey has had a lot of plot twists in it. I started in construction, and basically, a near fatal accident was the reason I started my first career change. And since then, I've had a career journey that has spanned construction, insurance, teaching, and even product design before finally becoming a coach full time. And throughout this journey, I've experienced the full gambit of emotions: imposter syndrome, doubt, anxiety, depression, all those self sabotaging beliefs. I'm I'm well versed in them. So now what I do is I help professionals basically rewire their mindsets to turn down the volume on that uncertainty, that doubt, that lack of confidence, and help them live their lives and their career with more confidence and certainty in themselves. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we are very glad to have you join us, and you definitely have a good background in career changes. So we're excited to hear your insights today. So, Chris, our first question here. This person is asking. They want to network without social media, specifically LinkedIn. So that's a common question that we get. A lot of people are kind of social media averse, and they've had some disruptive and even predatory persons follow them on social media. So what are some of your tips that you would give this person on how to network in a practical sense?
It's a great question because networking is easily one of the best things you can do for changing careers. And honestly, I'll tell you that I haven't really found any opportunities using LinkedIn. I think it's a great platform to get your voice out there. But where I found success was actually finding communities, either via Slack or maybe in your local area. Basically, finding those communities where you'll have those industry experts who might be basically a step or two ahead of the title that you're looking for. And all I do is I'd recommend just lead with curiosity.
Hmm.
Just try to connect with that person and ask, hey, you know what? You went down this career journey, and this is a current challenge I'm coming across. Do you have any expertise or insight you'd be willing to share over maybe 20 minutes? And that's a nuance that a lot of people I think miss out on because a lot of people will hit you with a big ask like, hey, can you review my resume? Can you give me a referral? And what that does is subconsciously that person's thinking they're just trying to use me, so whether they get the job or not, I'm never going to hear from them again. So I'd recommend just look at where are those communities where those people who might be a step or two ahead of you are, and just reach out and just try to learn from them. And as a result, you start to gain trust, you start to gain expertise, and from that, opportunities become a byproduct.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that advice. And then, as kind of a follow-up to that, as you are having those conversations, then circling back and showing that you took their advice and you followed their tips. And, it just goes a long way to kind of building up that relationship, I think.
Absolutely, because people love to help people if you're easy to help out. If you're willing
Right.
to take that advice, people love to help you out. So yeah, just being that much easier, actually showing that you have an interest in their story, their expertise will go a long way.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And just to reiterate too, like I think your idea of finding local events, joining associations. I know in our area, like the Chamber of Commerce is really active. They have a lot of networking events that are open to anyone. So yeah, there can definitely be some good opportunities for in-person networking there. Okay, so we have another good question here. So this person has had what they describe, I like this, as a meandering career path. They've done a lot of those sort of jack of all trades jobs. So now, no matter what job they apply for, it kind of looks like a career change. They try to, use their cover letter to draw a connecting thread through their experience, but that only helps if employers actually read the cover letter. So any thoughts or advice on how to approach that situation where you have that meandering career path?
First off, welcome to the club. The great thing about how to translate your experience from what you've done in the past to what you're doing, what you're basically targeting is, I again, kind of piggybacking off the last question, is reach out to people in that industry and figure out like what are the common challenges, what is the common terminology, because what you want to do is to take that those what you call meandering experience. You want to take the applicable aspects of that and translate it to that new career, and that's not necessarily in a cover letter. That could take place in your resume or even at a networking event, just to communicate the value that you bring to that role.
Mhm.
So I'll give you an example. When I was transitioning from insurance into education, I completely botched the beginning. What I would do is I would think that, hey, you know what? I'll just show them all this industry knowledge I have. So I talked about actual cash value, replacement cost policies, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, they didn't either. And so I confused them and I lost them. So what I recommend people do is talk to people in that industry and make note of what are the common keywords that they bring up? What are some of the common topics, the terminology, and then look at your experience and what are some examples when you maybe solved a problem that's applicable to that situation. So for example, when I went from insurance to education, I basically framed it like, hey, I took complex insurance policies and I broke them down in a way that someone with limited insurance experience would understand.
Mm.
And that translated to education. So the nice thing is, it sounds like you've got a wealth of knowledge and education experience. It's just a matter of how can you translate it into a way that applies to the industry that you're looking for.
Right. Yeah, it's taking the time to understand your audience and then learning how to speak to them effectively. But yeah, I totally agree that it could be done through an actual conversation, through your resume, through your LinkedIn, like how you're sort of branding yourself on there. It doesn't have to just be the cover letter. But yeah, that's
Absolutely.
that's really good advice, Chris. Thank you. Okay. All right. So we have another good one here. So this person is a former educator. So they're saying a lot of former teachers or professors like themselves who have left the field to pursue other types of work. There seems to be a large number of us out there. What ideas do you suggest to stand out as this person tries to rebrand themselves? So I guess concerned about just sounding like all the other educators who are maybe trying to make a career change.
That's a great question. And the best thing I could tell you is leverage your story.
Hmm.
So, for example, when I was leaving education into design, my story is what helped me set me apart from the rest of the people who were possibly leaving education or going into design. What's the time that you solved a problem? What's your origin story? Why are you going into this new career path from education? Because people might have similar backgrounds as you, but they won't have the same story that you have.
Hmm.
So make sure that you leverage that and just think about kind of going back to the last question. What are some problems you solved? What are some ways that you can leverage your prior experience to stand out in this new field? So, for example, when I went from education into design, I absolutely highlighted that I used to be a teacher. I worked with this technology all the time. It made my life just infuriating because it was always falling short. Problem solving as a teacher, when are you not solving problems? I mean, Keith, I'm sure you can relate to
Oh yes.
this. So just figure out what are some of those stories that you can leverage in order to get to that next career path.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good advice. I think, anybody can just kind of regurgitate, what they did. Even, accomplishments sometimes can fail to impress, but actually telling those stories, I think that's really good advice. That can help you stand out for sure. All right, let's go ahead to our next one here. Okay, so suggestions on kind of where to start if you're feeling like you might want to make a career change, but you have no idea, what you might want to do.
So, great question. To get clarity on your next steps, there's two parts to this. One, I'd recommend where's your skill set, where's your interest, and where are your values?
Hmm,
What's an activity that you like to do where when you do it, time just seems to fly by? Look at what are your values? What are your non-negotiables? Do you want, more time with a family? Do you want a strong work-life balance? Whatever the case may be in your scenario. And then just where do your interests lie? And then take a look at some possible careers that spark your interest. And again, I might sound like a broken record here, but what I highly recommend is look for someone who's in that industry, maybe a step or two ahead of you, and just get the good, the bad, and the ugly from that person because they tend to be the people who, in my experience, have been the most honest. What's the good aspects of it? What are the current challenges? And what are just some of the absolute drawbacks?
hmm,
And that might give you an idea of like, hey, maybe this is something I can absolutely make a future out of, or maybe this is something where maybe this is just redirection.
hmm.
So just take all that to an account and you'll get a lot more clarity moving forward if you take those two steps.
Well, and also, Chris, I think that as you're having those conversations after you've done that self reflection that you're recommending there, you could then also ask that person who's been in the shoes and done the job, like, share about yourself, and then say, do you think there's a place for me in this field? And they could have
Absolutely.
some insights to share as well. Yeah. Chris, we should have, as a disclaimer, mentioned that you've had some mentors who have greatly influenced your life. So that's why you're part of why I'm sure you're emphasizing the importance of conversations.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest mistake I made in my career is basically trying to be self-made. What I would do is I would reach out to people. It's like Olympic athletes. They surround themselves with coaches who help complement them and boost them. It's the same thing with your career. I've surrounded myself with public speaking coaches, mentors, life coaches, career coaches, and the amount that I learned and the amount that I've grown in that just short amount of time was just crazy. So yeah, if I sound like a broken record and I keep saying reach out to people in that industry, that's the reason why. That will make you go a lot faster. And you don't need to learn every lesson the hard way. Learn from people who've already done it to save yourself a lot of headache down the road.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a lot to be said for having that support network, because change is scary. You have that fear of failure, fear of the unknown. So if you have people that you can, kind of help sort of share the fear with you a little bit, it can make it a lot easier.
Absolutely.
All right, let's see. Okay, so here's a good question. So this person is asking you, what advice do you have for people who are maybe trying to make a career change kind of later in their career, especially if they are, already at or maybe targeting kind of executive level roles?
It's a great question. And one common obstacle that you might come across if you go the traditional route is ageism. Unfortunately, that's just something that exists. I don't get it because you're being penalized for having a lot of experience. But again, networking, but also being able to convey the value you bring, being able to condense the experience and the insight that you have and show that you're the solution to this company's problem will go a long way to helping you stand out in a crowded market. Because the nice thing is, you've got a lot of experience. Problem is, you also have a lot of experience. So, how can you basically craft that story to help you stand out? Because hiring managers are looking for someone who is the solution to a problem that they have. And once you're able to position yourself with that leverage and your experience, your extensive background, that will go a long ways and that'll help you bypass that ageism.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely good advice. And just kind of scrolling through these questions, I think ageism is a topic that might come up a couple times today. So, yeah, it's it's one of those things. I'm with you. I don't understand why it exists, because everybody brings, some type of value to the table. And if you have a wide breadth of experience, there's a lot of positive there. So
Absolutely. And the nice thing about telling a story is when you're conveying your story, what you're doing is you're engaging parts of the brain that we're programmed to resonate more with stories. We're able to retain stories, we understand them more effectively because I mean, this has been backed by research. More A greater chunk of our brain lights up when we hear a story versus when we just hear listed facts. And so when you go about doing that, what you're doing is you're bypassing that bias, that ageism that might be in your way. So, yeah, leveraging your experience and your stories is a great way of getting past that.
hmm, very good. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so this next one, this person is saying they're referring to this as more of an emotional question rather than a professional one, but they are identifying as a midlifer. They were laid off from their job. Do they have any advice with kind of dealing with the year old assumption during face to face interviews? Something beyond tailoring their resume and cover letter and mentioning that they're innovative and tech savvy. So other ideas related to kind of the ageism topic here, the storytelling. I know you mentioned other thoughts on that as well.
Basically, manage your energy level going into it because people will often overlook maybe your age when you're coming in with the right amount of energy. And what I mean by that is, are you someone who's confident that, hey, this is the skill set I bring, this is the reason I'm the solution to your problem? Because if you're not confident in your own abilities, you really can't expect a hiring manager to see the value you bring either. And there's a 4-step process I really like because when you get rejected, it's easy to get into that cycle of, oh, it chips away at your confidence. Oh, I'm not good enough. You start obsessing over what could I have done differently? Why am I not good enough? Is it because I'm too old? Whatever the case may be. And the first step is basically understand that there are factors outside your control that were a factor in you getting let go or getting rejected.
Hmm.
And there was really not much you could do about it, except the fact that, you know what? There's a lesson to be learned here. And even though you got rejected in some manner, you can take those lessons and bring them forward into whatever role you go into next. Forgive yourself because you know what? It's not your fault.
Yeah.
If you were let go, if you were rejected, you know what? Just cut yourself some slack because, and forgive them too, because holding on to that resentment and that anger, it's just like drinking poison in the attempt to kill someone else. It doesn't serve any purpose. And finally, I know it sounds a little cliche, but practice gratitude. You know what? You can be grateful that they let you go because now you can focus your time and attention into a new role, a new company that values your experience. So, how does that affect ageism? When you're able to let go of your past resentment and go into your new career, your new interview, whatever the case may be, with that level of energy, people tend to forget about your age and they start to see the value and the energy you're bringing. And that'll just, I mean, what can I say? They'll just scream volumes compared to just, you
Sure.
know what, this guy seems old.
Yeah. No, and each one of those things you mentioned kind of feeds into or plays off of one another. Like if you can, forgive yourself, have that kind of gratitude mindset, that's going to boost your confidence coming into the interview or a conversation with that confidence. That's going to positively impact the people that you are interacting with. So yeah, that's awesome. All right, let's look here. Okay, so this person is considering going into business for themselves. They want to start their own, consultancy. How can you get past sort of the "I want to" stage and just get on with it?
That's a great question. And I like to say motivation is overrated, discipline is underrated.
Mm,
I mean, it's like going to the gym when, those days when you just don't feel like it, but you put in the reps anyway, you start to, you're glad that you put in the repetitions. So, one thing I like to do to boost your motivation, one is to do a career invoice. And it's a pretty simple tool, but it allows you to kind of expand your perspective and help you zoom out from your current situation and just basically take a piece of paper, split it up into two sections: the cost of staying, the cost of leaving, and starting your own business. So, what's the cost of staying? It might be, lack of growth in your current career. It could be less time you spend with your family. It could be, stress headaches, something along those lines. And it goes much further than just financial cost.
Mm.
But then, the cost of leaving, you might deal with some uncertainty. You might deal with, at the beginning, you might not have a ton of customers. But then that way you have a visual to kind of give you a greater perspective of what you're going against. And you might be surprised which one's more expensive. I always found this to be one of the biggest motivators for people who are not quite sure whether they should take the jump yet or not, because then that you get the whole picture.
Yeah.
But another thing that I like to recommend to people is a combination of visualization and action. So picture yourself in that role, whether it's, picture the life, picture the feelings that are with you when you're in that new role, when you started your own business, and then follow it up with action. And the reason this works is because, I mean, they did research on this where they would take Olympic athletes, they would scan their brains, and they would see how much of the brain would light up when they're visualizing something versus when they were actually competing. And the results showed that there was really no differentiation between the two. The brain couldn't tell the difference between visualization and execution. And so this basically motivated the Olympic athletes to perform better. So visualize what you want to do and then follow up with actions. What are some small steps you can take right now to get you to that end point? It doesn't need to be huge. I mean, you could start your business off as a side hustle while you're working full time, whatever those steps are to make it a little less overwhelming to start.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the visualization. I have never heard of that before, but that's pretty fascinating. But I love your advice, particularly about taking the small steps. I think, and this is a problem that I have as well. Like when I'm trying something new or considering something new, it's really hard to not look at everything all at once and think that's way too overwhelming. I can't possibly do that. But if you kind of chunk it up into small, manageable steps, it becomes a lot easier.
That is the big challenge with changing careers. It's so easy to look at the entire picture. We'll set goals like I want to change careers in 2 months, and then we end up getting disappointed in ourselves when we tend to overestimate what we can do in a matter of months and underestimate what we could do in a matter of a year or two.
Yep.
And breaking it up into smaller pieces, you're preventing yourself from getting disappointed. Maybe this week I dedicate myself to updating my resume. Maybe this week I dedicate to building more connections on, via LinkedIn, whatever the case may be. So yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Keith.
And then remembering to give yourself a pat on the back for each step that you're taking.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so another one here. So this person is asking, what are some signs that you should maybe pursue some reskilling or some upskilling before attempting a career change? Your job seem to require tech and automation tools, experience with those tools. How do recruiters view kind of reskilling versus the ability to learn on the job? So what are just kind of your thoughts on that, or signs like this person is saying that it might be time to pursue some upskilling?
The best sign from my own personal experience is I would feel anxious if my career was getting stagnant.
Hmm.
If I felt like there was really not a lot of potential to go any further up, that was always an indication or a sign that, what, my gut was telling me it's time to upskill. It's time to explore different opportunities to expand my skill set. So I would look at different alternatives. I mean, obviously, you can go back and get a 4-year degree if that's what's required. Personally, I recommend it's maybe sort of the boot camps or like the self assessments or like the self paced courses because you're a working professional. But I always view that as if you start feeling a little anxious, a little restless, that was always a sign that we need to do something right now to start progressing because that stagnation just breeds anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you are still employed as well and you're kind of working on some of that upskilling or reskilling sort of when you have the time, you could then try to find ways in your current work to apply some of those skills so that you not only have learned it, but you can go to prospective future employers and say, look at the way that I've applied these skills as well.
Absolutely. And there are and I know there are like dislocated worker programs. There are different programs that will actually help pay for you to upskill basically depending on what industry you're targeting. So that's definitely an avenue to explore as well if you're considering changing careers or just switching to a different discipline.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I know at least in the US, like each state has its own version of that, but you have, publicly funded programs to help people that are, like you said, dislocated, laid off, what have you. So yeah, definitely looking into some of those other resources is a really good idea. Thanks for mentioning that. Okay. Okay, so here is another one, a little bit similar to one that we've had already, but that's okay. So this person is, asking, how do you change careers when you are in sort of the twilight of your work journey? Oops. Well, that question might have gotten deleted. Oh, never mind. All right, we're going to move on to a different question then. All right, so this person is asking, so they're asking, do we know how to show experience with their portfolio? Okay, sorry. This is worded a little confusingly, but I think I've got it here. So this person is asking, how can you show portfolio experience from their career on their resume? They have always worked a full-time job and have done other jobs on the side. So, if you have like work samples and things like that, do you have recommendations on how to kind of showcase that to employers, how to incorporate it on a resume? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my best piece of advice is to trim the fat as much as you can. Because consider your audience when you got someone who's a hiring manager, someone who's reviewing probably hundreds of resumes, they're probably just going to skim through it. They're going to, look at the highlights because they're trying to find the most qualified person and the quickest time possible. And so what you put at the top of your resume should be the juiciest part. It's kind of like if you were to write a story, you want to really hook their attention with a summary right up there at the top, and then what are some of the ways you solve those challenges underneath. And if you got an expansive portfolio of careers, which by the way, kudos, that's awesome. But make sure you're including the most relevant examples to whatever career path you're pursuing. So, for example, when I was going from education into design, I was also working on the side as an insurance adjuster, but I didn't include that in my resume. I was just focused on what's the applicable experience that translates to the career that I want, because the more value you can display in the most concise manner possible is what's going to help you stand out versus a lot of the wordier resumes that just tend to get thrown into the discard pile.
Mm, very good. Okay, so our next one here. Okay, so this one, getting back to the idea of upskilling. So this person is talking about, upskilling and changing careers when you're, in sort of that twilight of your career. They're asking. So they say that they're pushing 60, as they phrase it. Isn't that a bit old to try to do some of that upskilling or career changing? So, what are your thoughts on that?
No, even though some people might have that bias, absolutely not. That is you know what? There's no bad time to upskill and change careers. I mean, I've met with clients who changed careers in their 80s and 90s. So there's absolutely no reason why you can't do that. Are you going to face some ageism? There's a good chance of it, but also that's not necessarily a bad thing. That just tells you that that employer or that person is so narrow-minded that they're not worth your time. So you can focus your time and energy on people who are. So if the question is are you looking for a reason, is this the right time to upskill, maybe change careers? Absolutely. That's where the networking, conveying your value, and just the stories you tell yourself, that's where you're going to have the greatest impact.
Yeah, and I think a lot of employers appreciate people who have that kind of lifelong learner mindset. So yeah, showing that you're still trying to pick up new skills, I think is valuable.
It shows tenacity and resilience. I mean, what employer wouldn't want that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have another question here, kind of related to ageism. So this person is asking, do you find that like remote or hybrid jobs are potentially less age discriminatory versus in-person jobs? I don't know if you
Oh,
have any, you might not have any stats on that, but just sort of thoughts on that.
that's a good question. As far as ageism, it's tough to say. I've noticed a lot of the hybrid roles and the remote roles. There's always that challenge of companies trying to get people back in the office, and that just completely upends their lives. As far as ageism, I think that's just used as an excuse to cut some people off from returning to the office. If say during the pandemic, for example, you moved someplace because all positions were basically remote. I think honestly, your age, whatever excuse they could come up with to use as a scapegoat was a reason to get rid of people. So the short answer is no. I don't think ageism really plays a role in remote or hybrid. I think just the company cultures themselves is the real problem, not the biases that come with it.
Mhm. Yeah, there are definitely there are a lot of companies out there that do it right and treat everybody or create that inclusive environment. But there are also others out there that frustratingly enough do not. I will say so. One thing that we have found with FlexJobs, just sort of the breakdown of experience level with remote jobs, it really runs the whole gamut. So you find executive level, you find experienced, you find entry level. So really, no matter kind of what part you're at in your career, if you are interested in remote, there tend to be options available for you. So just wanted to
Absolutely.
throw that out there. Okay. All right. So this person is saying they have several different options for kind of new roles that they could or are thinking about potentially pivoting into. So how should they think about kind of branding themselves and listing or describing their work experiences on evergreen locations like LinkedIn or portfolio websites, given that they are typically told they should have different kind of base resumes for each type of role that you're applying for. So kind of common question here. You're supposed to have a tailored resume, your LinkedIn. How do you navigate that?
That's a great question. And that one could be tough because as you could tailor every resume, but you only have one LinkedIn profile, or at least you should. I mean, I guess you
Right.
can make another one. I don't know if I'd recommend that. Um, what I'd recommend is look at the foundation for each of those careers. What is the foundation and the foundational skill level, the foundational experience? Use that to highlight your LinkedIn experience. And then the rest, depending on what career you're looking at, that could come across in your messaging, whether that's LinkedIn posts, comments, the communities you join, the networking events. You can convey that then on a one-to-one basis. But yeah, when you have just one profile and potentially several different LinkedIn, link or several different career paths that you could pursue, get that foundation in place. And then you know what? If you commit to one, great. But yeah, just have that base in place on LinkedIn, and then you can tailor it depending on what your needs are and what your interests are, depending on the setting you're in.
Yeah. Well, and I would also pull in some of your early advice about, kind of trimming the fat, so to speak.
Yep.
So, on the profile, have the highlights, have the things that communicate your best skills and competencies and the value in those different areas. Scale back the stuff that's not going to be necessarily as relevant to as broad of an audience.
Yep. And again, this is where storytelling is going to be your best friend because stories will be able to translate multiple experiences, whereas a LinkedIn profile might only be able to fixate on one. So if you can leverage storytelling, whether it's in a post or in your about section, whatever the case may be, that will help connect the dots better than just focusing on which career path should I look at.
Yeah. Okay, so we have another question here. So this one touches on ageism again, but more so, kind of overcoming that fear of switching career paths that kind of can come along with that feeling or concern of ageism.
Yeah, so that is not an uncommon thing. I mean, a career change by nature is there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of unknown, there's a lot of reasons to be fearful, to be uncertain, to doubt yourself. And first off, I want to let you know that these thoughts and feelings, these are just a self-defense mechanism. This is our subconscious trying to protect us from something that could potentially harm us. So that's not necessarily a bad thing that you're experiencing that. The nice thing about fear is it's a double-edged sword. It could hold you back or you can actually use it as motivation. It's a very powerful motivator short term. So, like in my example, when I left construction, my first career change, I didn't have a fear because I almost fell off a 5-story building. That's a very powerful motivator to change careers.
Yeah.
But also just recognizing that, you know what, this is a normal reaction to something that's, you know what, something that's new, something that might be exciting. And all you need to do is just figure out what's the trigger, what's the fear, what's that thought that's associated with this fear. How can you slow down those thought patterns? So for me, I'm a big fan of guided meditation to help slow down those thought patterns. And then that way you can start reframing it, making a habit of, instead of going from maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm not I don't I'm too old to change careers, switch it to, you know what, I got a lot of experience, I have a unique perspective, I can really stand out in this career. Because when you doubt yourself or when you have that fear, your mind is going to look for ways to validate it. It's
Hmm.
going to look at like, hey, we got rejected from this interview, maybe we should stop doing this. But if you reframe it to like, hey, I got a lot of experience, I have a lot of expertise to share, your mind's going to start looking for opportunities. Here's an opportunity to share my expertise. Here's an opportunity to leverage my experience to stand out. So I hope that that's helpful. Again, that's another way where you can just bypass ageism, because when you show that you're the solution to a problem, you show your unique perspective to the right people, they're not going to care about your age.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And, I know in some of our previous conversations, you've referred to silencing the noise. And I love your way of phrasing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so this person is asking about tips on kind of differentiating your resume, talking about potential concerns with is it being screened by AI, or is there an ATS that could be scoring it or ranking it? So what are kind of just sort of your resume tips there on differentiating yourself?
So that's a great question. So as far as resumes go, concise and clarity are your best friends. As far as ATS, I hear conflicting results. I hear people say it just scans them and then a person still sees it. I hear people say it rejects them outright. I don't know if it's really relevant, because if you want to really maximize on your results, you want to translate your experience to whatever career you're pursuing. So what are some of the common keywords, terminology, challenges, and then just focus on, how can you show the value you bring up front. So if someone's just going to skim my resume, how can I grab their attention? So for example, if I'm going to write down and, a line for experience, I solved X by doing YZ, or ran into this challenge and learned, XYZ, whatever the case may be. Just show the value or the lessons you learned up front. And then again, that summary, that about section right at the top, make sure that that is tailored to show the hiring manager why you're the right fit for this position, because that is the juiciest piece of real estate that you want them to grab their attention. Otherwise, they're just going to look at it for like a couple minutes and then they're going to, go on to the next.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that goes back to trimming the fat, show what value you bring, and translate your experience. So, whether a robot looks at it or a human looks at it, you're still going to get a shot.
Right. Yeah, and speaking to that direct audience, their needs. I also try to emphasize. I think a lot of people, because they're thinking about AI or ATS or what have you, fall into the trap of like keyword stuffing on a resume. Do you have thoughts about that at all?
It's good to know what keywords to use. I wouldn't bog down your resume with just keywords. I'd focus more on the challenges that you're trying to solve, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what a hiring manager wants. They want a solution to a problem that they have.
Right.
And so you want to leverage yourself as that. Just jamming keywords into a resume that may or may not fit, you might get past the ATS, but once a human looks at it, then you might get rejected. So just just be familiar with what kind of terminology do you use. Make sure, if when applicable, you change that terminology, but make sure that you're showing how you're a solution to a problem. Make
Right.
sure you're addressing how you solve a particular issue. That's going to stand out more.
Right. And incorporating keywords in that context that you're talking
Absolutely.
about.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. I love that. All right. Oh, I accidentally deleted that one. So I don't remember the exact words, but they were asking on tips to identify and avoid scam jobs.
Basically, if anyone asks for your credit card, your social security number, delete, don't engage at all. These are people who feed off desperation. These are people who feed off people who are looking for a job. Don't No career recruiter in their right mind will not give you the time of day if they don't look at your resume, look at your experience, and they do not need to know your social security number or your credit card info right off the bat. If those are just incredible red flags to avoid scammers.
Yep. Yeah. And, other ones that we see, people like, offering you a job without any type of interview or anything, or like really kind of pressuring you to move through a process quickly, trying to get you to not see the warning signs. So there's speeding you along through there. But yeah, no, definitely good advice. No sensitive personal or financial information should be passed out. But okay, so all right, this next person here, so they have experienced a career gap, and now they're starting to apply for jobs after the break. Is it necessary to apply for the same type and same, sort of profile of job, or in the same field where they had experience before? Or do you recommend that this is maybe a good time for them to explore different options?
Honestly, yes to both.
Sure.
To be completely frank, I mean, it depends on the reason for the gap. Obviously, if someone asks about it, just be transparent. But yeah, I mean, this is well, you probably will have a greater chance of going back to what you were doing before because you have a proven track record in that field. And you know what? That might be great to just short term sustain you until maybe you want to change careers, maybe a couple months down the road. But I'm also not going to be the one to tell you that, hey, this is not an opportune time to change careers at all. It all comes down to where do your interests, your values, and your skill set lie? And then how can you tell your story? How can you convey the value you bring to get that career change? Speaking from experience, when I went from education into design, you know what? I took up a past role that I used to work in as an insurance adjuster just to pay the bills. And it was just an alternative way of me getting to the career I wanted. So you know what? If you want to change careers at this time and you're struggling because you just don't quite have as much experience, not a bad idea to just, you know what, get a career that helps pay the bills from something you have a lot of expertise in, but then that gives you the opportunity to, upskill, do volunteer projects, whatever you need to do to get that experience to get into the next one.
Right. No, I think that's really good advice. There's no reason just because you find that next job out of the break, you don't have to stay there forever. It could just be like you said, pay your bills while you're considering other options and pursuing other options.
Absolutely. And I always tell people don't have a plan B, just have alternate ways of getting to plan A.
Hmm. I
That's not
love
a
that.
step down if you have to take another job just to pay the bills. That's just an opportunity for you to keep pursuing the career you want.
That's great. So I think we have time for at least one, maybe two more questions here. This person also is asking about, a break or a gap, just kind of general recommendations for, those of us who have a gap because we stayed at home to raise children.
Be transparent about it. What's the shame in being a parent, for a kid? You know what? If it comes up, just address it. If it doesn't, you know what? You don't need to talk about it. Just talk about the skills and experience you bring to the table. But
Mhm.
yeah, there's absolutely no shame in being a stay-at-home parent and raising your kid. So if it's brought up, just be honest with them.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times too, now this of course isn't applicable for everyone, but when you're staying at home to raise kids, a lot of times you're volunteering with their activities, and at the very least, you're using a lot of those skills just to kind of manage your home and your
Yeah,
household. So, I think that there are ways that you can leverage it too to your advantage.
absolutely.
Okay, so let's try to squeeze in at least one more here. Okay, so this is kind of going back to sort of your emphasis on having conversations with people that are, maybe doing the type of work that you want to be doing. So this person is asking, do you have any sort of general tips in addition to networking on looking for a career change when you're not exactly sure, what it will, or excuse me, what it will look like yet in terms of industry and position. So, kind of having, those exploratory conversations, but also, other ways of kind of researching and identifying areas of interest.
Yeah, that's a great question. Another area that you can definitely look at are volunteer projects. They kind of give you a sneak peek at what that job might look like. And if it's an activity where, you know what, time flies by, you really enjoy what you're doing, that's a strong indication that, you know what, this might be a potential career path for me outside of just networking. Another thing to look at is, you know what, just take a look at your values. What are some careers that align with those values that you have? All of this kind of gives you a sneak peek at what kind of career direction do you want to go in, and what are some of the things that are your non-negotiables.
Yeah. I'll also throw in there too, because I'm a big AI nerd. I love using ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, and stuff. So,
Absolutely.
even just asking them like, "Hey, I'm really great at these, with these skills and like this type of work. Like, what suggestions do you have?" And then beyond that, doing some of the further research, having those conversations and things like that.
Yeah, because you can do that with AI. You just, know, like, what's the good, the bad, and the ugly of this potential career path. It's a great way to get started, and then that might give you an indication if this is an area I should dig into deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we should start drawing to a close, Chris. I do want to point out to people in our handouts tab there. There is a PDF that you can click on, and it does have a link to Chris's LinkedIn and website if you want to check out his work a little bit more. But Chris, big thank you to you for joining us today. Thank you to all of our attendees as well. Really hope that this was beneficial for everyone. And thank you again. We really enjoyed having you, Chris.
Oh, thanks for having me. And yeah, if anyone's struggling with a career change, if you're struggling with any self sabotaging beliefs, don't struggle the way that I did. Don't make the same mistake I did. Reach out to someone. My DMs are always open. You know what? Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Don't go through this alone. So, yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you once again, Chris, and to all of our attendees. And we wish you all the best of luck with your job search and your career change efforts. Take care.
Have a good one.